Right now, we're going to travel to ESPN.com. Senior writer, covers college football landscape, and always a guy we depend on when news is breaking out here in Tuscaloosa. Chris Lowe, I hope your day is going well. Thank you for joining us here in T-Town.
Yeah, it's going great. It's good to be with you guys, Ryan.
Well, and I appreciate you going back-to-back weeks and letting us pick your brain. Yesterday, we spent pretty much the majority of the day on one paragraph from ESPN.com, and I'll read it to you. I know you put it together. Co-defensive coordinator and inside linebacker coach Pete Golding, who assumed the play calling from Lupoi during the first month of the 2018 season, is expected to remain on Alabama staff. But what a story that would have been. If that breaks in September, that gets a lot of attention.
Well, what doesn't in the realm of Alabama football there get a lot of attention?
Well, sure. No. I'm just saying. But, I mean, and I think most people missed that on Sunday, and we tried to bring it out and talk about the article.
You know, and it's one of those things where play calling really on both sides of the ball sometimes is a little bit overrated. You know, because at the end of the day, we know who the defensive coordinator is at Alabama. and he has been since the day he walked in the door in 2007. Of course, we're talking about the head football coach, Nick Saban. But the day-to-day and the week-to-week, you know, game planning and actually calling the defensive signals, sometimes though that's more of a team effort than I think any of us media or fans really know. And I think last year it was one of those deals where, as the season wore on, Pete Golding was the guy that was calling most, if not all, of the defensive plays. And again, it's not like he was the only one. I think there's not just at Alabama, but a lot of places there are. You know, it's a joint effort sometimes.
Well, what does it say about Tosh Lupoi? Because if he loses that responsibility, I don't know if he thought his days were numbered, but he goes to the NFL. I think it says a lot about him and his integrity that he continued to recruit at the level, even though he may have been knowing that, hey, I'm probably going to end up in the NFL, I'm going to end up at another spot. But he kept recruiting at a high level and helped Nick Saban sign one of the top classes in some, or even saying, I heard a guy on your network, Tom Luganville, talking about this, maybe Nick Saban's best class ever. Tosh Lupoi kept grinding.
Yeah, Tosh is a recruiter and has been for a long time. And I think you're right. I think it says a lot about him in a lot of different areas. And you know, when Nick brought in that staff last year, it was the youngest staff he had since he'd been at Alabama. Last year's staff, which included Tosh and Josh Gaddis. Now, as you look at the staff now, coming in, you sort of see a different balance. You know, of more coaches that are veteran with still some youth, and I don't think that's not by design. I think last year Nick wanted to get younger, felt like being younger would help him on the recruiting trail and relate better to recruits. And as you just pointed out, what Tom Luganville said, it certainly paid dividends with an excellent class. Of course, I would say, when's the last time Alabama hasn't had a good recruiting class? But I think this year now, as you've seen some of the turnover on the staff, that he's looking to get maybe more of a balance.
Chris, when you look at these coaches, I think there's 5 officially now, but do you think there's more change coming in Tuscaloosa? Do you think we're going to learn something in the next couple of weeks, maybe post-signing day, that maybe there's other coaches that will not be a part of the 2019 coaching staff?
Yeah, I think there'll be some more turnover. I think there's 5, and I think there'll be at least another one, maybe 2, that won't be there next year. And we'll see how it all shakes out. And you know, that's a fluid situation, as you know.
Sure.
Things can change, typically do change. But it's you know, I think there were 4 last year he had leave. So, in fact, if let's say there's 6, or let's say there's 7 that leave this year, by my count over the last 4 years, that would be 18 assistants who've left. But I think it's always important to put things into context. And if you say there's 18 in the last 4 years, if there's indeed 7 this year, of that 18, 7 of those guys are now head coaches in college, head football coaches and FBS head coaches in the college ranks. And then there's another 6 who would have left at the time to go to NFL jobs, take NFL jobs. One of those, Steve Sarkisian, who is returning to be Nick's offensive coordinator. So I think you got to put it in the proper context. And then I think you look at another one, that would be, 13 of the 18. So if you go guys who left to be coordinators, Josh Gaddis left to be the coordinator at Michigan and chief play caller. That would be 14 of the 18 that either went to be head coaches or bettered themselves to be a coordinator or go to the NFL, which I think puts a little bit more, because when you look at the numbers, and I know people do this, and we're all guilty of it, fans, media, say, wow, look at all this turnover. And certainly it's not ideal to have as much turnover as he's had over the last few years. But a lot of these guys are coming in and they're parlaying it into success elsewhere. And I think that's when you're Nick Saban and you bring in good coaches and coaches that, aspire to go on, you're going to have other, whether it's NFL or other schools, come in and poach them.
Chris, do you think Nick Saban's decided on who's going to be his defensive coordinator? Because he's hired some guys that all kind of fit that role, or not all, but I mean, he's got options. You think he'll go with somebody that, as you pointed out in the article, Pete Golding, who called the percentage of the plays from the first month on, or do you think he'll go with a new face?
No, I think Pete Golding will still be the defensive coordinator and certainly be heavily involved. Again, sometimes you'll see co-offensive coordinators. Charles Kelly, for instance, I think will be heavily involved. Charles is a guy, he's been a defensive coordinator before at Florida State. Most recently, he was at Tennessee on Jeremy Pruitt's staff. I know Jeremy Pruitt thought a lot of Charles Kelly. And I think Charles has got a nice gig there, having worked in the Alabama State system. Coming back, it's going to help him get an even better pension, which was really a no-brainer for him, and the chance to come back and work, for Nick Saban on a team that's going to have a chance every year to play for a championship or certainly be swimming in those waters. Sal Sinceri is a guy that I don't think Sal's going to be a coordinator, but he's a guy that, you talk to people around the sport, one of the better defensive line outside linebacker coaches around. He's coached in the NFL. So you look at guys like that, experienced guys who coached at a number of different places. Both of those guys on the defensive side of the ball have coached, in Sal's case, has coached under Saban before. That's the thing they didn't have last year when you look at that staff, is they didn't have one of those guys like a Kevin Steele or a Jeremy Pruitt or a Kirby Smart that had coached under Nick and knew his system inside and out. And I think that was the part of it, if you looked at Saban and maybe there was more of a burden on him defensively because of that. Well, you look at some of the guys he's bringing back now, I don't think there will be as heavy a burden on him.
Your colleague Adam Rittenberg at ESPN.com was talking about this. It's been reported now by multiple different people. But Hodman Wiggins coming from Virginia Tech to Alabama. What do you know about Coach Wiggins?
Well, I think a guy, again, one of those guys that's a commodity, and a guy that a lot of people would have had interest in. And, you look at Nick, and he has gone all over the country and brought people in. I mean, you go back to when he brought in Jim McElwain, Josh Gaddis from Penn State, and I think he's similar. A guy that Nick feels like will fit, a guy that can recruit and coach, and he's that's the thing that's, I won't say different, but Saban's not afraid to go outside of his circle sometimes and bring in guys that he feels like can help him in all areas.
Yeah, it is simply amazing for him to deal with this. But I also think, I remember when Jim McElwain left in Alabama and went to Colorado State, and Doug Nussmeier was brought in, and Nick Saban was asked the question about what changes. And he said, nothing changes. Why would we change everything in the building based on one guy? Why don't we force that one guy to learn everything that we're doing rather than all of us learn what he's doing? And it always stuck with me. I could even almost carry to the room that he said it in. And it was just like one of those things that maybe the transitions are easier because of that approach.
Well, you're right. His system, and I talked to Mike Loxley about that in Miami for the Orange Bowl. Nick's system it's his system. It's his program. And just because he's had a lot of turnover doesn't mean he's going to change to fit what somebody else does. They've got to change to fit what he does. And listen, the turnover he's had the last couple of years, it's not ideal in any way, shape, or form. It's certainly not the kind of thing he wants to happen. But, again, when you hire good people, and sometimes, here's the thing to remember, too, about all this, is sometimes guys leave, and, we rarely, if ever, see Nick come out publicly and say that he's fired this guy or they've not retained this coach. What happens is behind the scenes is he tells me, he gives them notice, listen, it's probably be good if you start looking for another job. If need be, I will help you. And I think oftentimes that happens. And I think that's probably happened in a few cases this year when maybe guys that he doesn't feel like the right fit either recruiting-wise, from a staff standpoint. But that's happened more than once over the years when guys leave. And there's the old saying, really in the industry that Nick Saban doesn't fire guys, he gets them other jobs.
It's a unique approach, and I know he's said that a couple of times. It is, but it does happen, and I think that's when you look back at the Dan Enos story, and you and I both respect Bruce Feldman, and I think the article is 100% correct, but I think there's more to the story that maybe people don't know, that Nick Saban, maybe he saw Sark available and said, why stick with Dan Enos when I can get something a little bit better?
Well, and listen, haven't done this as long as I've done it. There's always, whether it's my story or Bruce's story,
sure.
Bruce is as good as it
right.
gets.
Sure.
There's always probably more to the story. There's always several different sides, and sometimes more than just two sides. I think at the end of the day, Dan Enos, who did a really nice job this year with the quarterbacks, I think he probably thought, you know what, I don't know if I'm wired or if it's in my best interest or in Alabama's best interest to be Nick Saban's play caller. The deal came open or the job came open at Miami. I think that's how it all went down. And I had some other people tell me before that they weren't sure that was going to be a fit for not just him but for everybody. And sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to work out for everybody involved.
100% agree. I'm really excited to see what Sark is going to be able to do. I was impressed with the hire in 2016. So impressed now. And I just, when you study him, brilliant offensive mind.
Yeah, and I think Sark's, obviously he knows what he's getting into. That's the thing about Nick.
Sure.
Nick's not the easiest
Great
person
point.
in the world to work for. He'll be the first to tell you that. As Damian Harris told me last year when we were talking, he says, Coach Saban's not for everybody. Alabama's not for everybody, players and coaches. But you know what you're signing up for when you come to work for him. And this will be Nick Sark's second stint under Nick, and he knows exactly, what the demands are and what the grind's like. And, people talk about being Nick's defensive coordinator. See, I think being his offensive coordinator is even harder than being his defensive coordinator in a lot of ways. And because Nick still believes in complementary football. It all fits together, works together. And, you're not, the last thing you're going to leave his defense out there high and dry on the field. And they've played differently, and they've had to play differently because the game's changed and he's evolved. I think that's part of his brilliance. We see what they've done with Tua and the receiving core. But no, I agree. I think Sark's a brilliant offensive mind. Nick clearly has a lot of respect for him as an offensive guy, and it'll be interesting to see with that receiving core and with Tua Tagovailoa what kind of numbers they put up next year.
Chris Low, ESPN senior writer, ESPN.com. Chris, as always, thanks for making time for us this afternoon. We appreciate the conversation.
You bet. Thanks for having me.